Young nurse bathed a mafia boss in a coma, but he suddenly woke up and kissed her. The midnight shift always felt different. Emma moved through the dimly lit hospital room, her footsteps silent against the polished floor. The steady rhythm of machines created a familiar symphony. The soft beep of the heart monitor, the gentle whir of equipment that had become the soundtrack to her nights. Matteo Castellano lay still, as he had for the past 3 months. Even in this vulnerable state, there was something commanding about him. The sharp line of his jaw, the broad shoulders visible beneath the thin hospital gown. Emma reached for the warm washcloth she'd prepared, wringing out the excess water. "Another quiet night, Mr. Castellano," she murmured, falling into the comfortable routine of talking to him. It had become her habit during these long nights, filling the silence with her voice. "Let's get you cleaned up." Her movements were practiced and gentle as she began washing. His face. The cloth glided over his forehead, down the slope of his cheeks. His skin was warm beneath her touch, and she couldn't help but notice how his dark lashes rested against his cheeks. "You know," she continued softly, "sometimes I wonder if you can hear me. All these nights I've spent talking to you." Her voice trailed off as she remembered the countless confessions she'd shared with this unconscious man. Her fears, her loneliness, even the songs she'd sung to pass the time. "Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today." Now back to the story. The machines beeped steadily as Emma leaned closer, carefully washing along his jawline. Her fingers brushed against his skin, and something felt different. There was a slight tension there that she hadn't noticed before. "I probably shouldn't tell you this," she whispered, continuing her gentle ministrations, "but you're the best listener I've ever had." A sad smile crossed her face. "Probably because you can't exactly tell me to shut up, right?" The cloth moved down to his neck, and Emma felt her breath catch as she noticed something, the slightest flutter of movement beneath his eyelids. She froze, washcloth hovering inches from his skin, watching intently. Years of nursing experience told her that involuntary movements were common in coma patients, but this seemed different. Her heart began to race as his eyelids flickered again, more pronounced this time. "Mr. Castellano?" she whispered, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing. "Can you hear me?" The room felt suddenly smaller, the air heavy with possibility. Emma leaned closer, her professional instincts warring with the surge of hope in her chest. She'd seen countless false alarms before, but something about this moment felt different. Then it happened. His eyes began to open, slowly, struggling against what seemed like an immense weight. Dark brown irises, hazy with effort, gradually focused on her face. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she watched consciousness seep back into his features. Before she could move or call for help, his hand moved. The movement was weak, trembling with effort, but deliberate. His fingers found her cheek, the touch warm against her skin. Emma froze, caught between her training as a nurse and the sudden intimacy of the moment. Time seemed to slow as Matteo's hand drew her face down toward his. She could feel the slight shake in his muscles, the tremendous effort each movement cost him. His breath, warm and uneven, ghosted across her lips, moments before they met his. The kiss was gentle, almost hesitant, nothing like what she would have expected from a man whose name inspired fear in the underworld. His lips were soft against hers, the touch feather-light but unmistakably intentional. Emma jerked back, her mind reeling. Her patient, her comatose patient, had just kissed her. The professional part of her brain screamed that she should be calling for doctors, checking vitals, following protocols. But then his voice came, rough from disuse, barely above a whisper. "Please, don't scream. I need your help." The words were strained, desperate, and they stopped her in her tracks. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she stared into his dark eyes, finding them clear and intent despite his obvious weakness. That gaze held her captive, and Emma felt something shift in the air between them, an invisible thread pulling them together, charged with fear, desperation, and something else she couldn't quite name. Emma stumbled backward, her legs hitting the chair behind her. Her hands flew to her lips where the warmth of his kiss still lingered. The steady beeping of the heart monitor seemed deafening now, matching the frantic rhythm of her own pulse. "This isn't possible," she whispered, more to herself than to him. For 3 months, she'd cared for this man, bathed him, changed him, talked to him through countless nights. And now here he was, awake and looking at her with eyes that held too much awareness for someone who'd just emerged from a coma. Matteo's chest rose and fell with labored breaths, each movement appearing to cost him tremendous effort. His fingers twitched against the white hospital sheets, and Emma's medical training kicked in. She should be calling Dr. Russo, alerting the staff, running tests. But something in Matteo's desperate plea held her back. "You've been conscious?" Her voice trembled as she took a tentative step forward. "For how long?" He swallowed hard, his throat working with visible difficulty. "Weeks," he managed, the word barely audible. "Can't. Move during day. Drugs." Emma's mind raced. She thought about all the things she'd told him during those quiet nights. Her father's death, her struggles with student loans, the songs she'd sung when she thought no one could hear. Heat crept up her neck as she realized he'd been aware through all of, "Why did you?" She touched her lips again, unable to finish the question. A ghost of a smile crossed his face, despite his obvious exhaustion. "Only way, to make you stop and listen." Despite everything, a nervous laugh escaped her. It was either laugh or cry, and she couldn't afford to fall apart right now. She moved closer to his bed, her nursing instincts taking over as she checked his vitals on the monitor. "They're poisoning me," he continued, each word a struggle. "During day shift, special sedative, paralysis." Emma's hand froze on the monitor. "Who's poisoning you?" His eyes, dark and intense despite his weakness, locked onto hers. "My mother." The word hung in the air between them. Emma thought of Vittoria Castellano, who visited every day like clockwork, always perfectly dressed, always the picture of maternal concern. The woman who brought fresh flowers every week and spoke so tenderly to her supposedly comatose son. "Please." Matteo's voice cracked with desperation. "Need you. To keep pretending. If they know, I'm awake." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Emma's medical ethics warred with the raw plea in his voice. Everything about this situation was wrong. She should report this, should follow protocol, should maintain professional boundaries. But as she looked at him, really looked at him, she saw past the notorious mafia boss to the man trapped in his own body, fighting for his life. With trembling fingers, she reached out and touched his face again. His skin was warm, alive, so different from the countless times she'd tended to him thinking he couldn't feel her touch. His eyes fluttered closed at the contact, and she saw some of the tension ease from his features. "Okay," she whispered, knowing she was crossing a line she could never uncross. "I'll help you. I'll keep your secret." The words felt heavy with promise, with danger, with something else she couldn't quite name. Relief washed over his face, and Emma realized just how much energy he'd been expending to have this conversation. His breathing was becoming more labored, his movements more sluggish. "Rest," she told him softly, her hand still on his cheek. "We'll figure this out." His eyes met hers one last time, filled with a mixture of gratitude and something that made her heart skip. "Thank you, Emma," he breathed, her name on his lips, sending an unexpected shiver down her spine. The night shift seemed longer than usual. Emma sat in her usual chair beside Matteo's bed, but everything felt different now. The quiet beeping of monitors that had once been background noise now felt like a countdown to something she didn't fully understand. She watched his chest rise and fall, remembering the kiss from the night before. It still felt surreal, like something from a dream. But the memory of his trembling hand on her cheek, his desperate whispers, they were too vivid to be anything but real. The clock on the wall showed 3 a.m. Emma's thoughts drifted to earlier that day, when Vittoria Castellano had made her daily appearance. The woman had been immaculate as always. Designer clothes, perfect makeup, not a hair out of place. She'd touched Matteo's forehead with manicured fingers, cooing soft Italian words that now seemed more threat than comfort. "My poor boy," Vittoria had said, her voice dripping with concern. "Dr. Russo says we must be patient. These things take time." Emma's stomach churned at the memory. She'd stood in the corner of the room, checking vital signs and pretending not to notice how Vittoria's eyes had followed her every move. How many times had she witnessed this act? How many times had she been fooled by it? Dr. Russo was another piece of this twisted puzzle. Emma had always found his behavior odd. The way he insisted on administering Matteo's medications personally, how he showed up at strange hours, his cryptic conversations with Vittoria in hushed tones. Now it all made a horrible kind of sense. A slight movement caught her eye. Mateo's fingers twitched against the sheets, and his eyes slowly opened. Even this small motion seemed to require immense effort. "You're still here," he whispered, his voice rough from disuse. Emma leaned closer, keeping her voice low. "I couldn't leave. Not after." She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "Russo," Mateo managed to say, his dark eyes intense despite his weakness. "He works. For her." "The medications he gives you," Emma said, pieces clicking into place. "They're not what's listed in your chart, are they?" Mateo's laugh was bitter and barely audible. "Sedative cocktail. Paralysis. During day. Wears off. At night." Emma's medical training kicked in, her mind racing through possibilities. "That's why you can only move at night. The dosing schedule. 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., he confirmed, each word a struggle. "Complete paralysis. Can hear. Everything. Can't move." The horror of it struck Emma. Being trapped in your own body. Fully conscious while your own mother plotted against you. Day after day. Forced to endure their false concern while being slowly poisoned. Why would your own mother do this to you? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Pain flickered across his features. And not just the physical kind. Power. Control. My brother. Easier to manipulate. Emma reached for the water cup on his bedside table, helping him take small sips through the straw. His lips were dry, cracked. She wondered how long he'd been suffering in silence. "No one can know," he said after a moment, his voice slightly stronger from the water. "If they suspect, they'll kill me. Need you. To keep pretending." The weight of what he was asking settled over her. Keep his secret. Lie to everyone. Watch his mother and doctor. Russo continue their charade while knowing the truth. Emma's hand trembled as she set the cup down. "I'll help you," she said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. "But I'm scared." "I know," he whispered, and somehow those two words carried more understanding than any lengthy explanation could have. The medallion had been a constant companion since her father's death, its weight against her chest as familiar as breathing. Emma usually kept it tucked safely beneath her scrubs, but tonight, as she leaned over Mateo to clean the healing incision on his shoulder, the silver chain slipped free. The street, Christopher Metal caught the dim light from the bedside lamp, swaying gently between them. Emma didn't notice at first, focused on her task, but Mateo's sharp intake of breath made her pause. His eyes, still heavy with the lingering effects of the day's sedatives, fixed on the medallion with an intensity that made her skin prickle. The steady beeping of the heart monitor picked up slightly. "That metal?" he whispered, his voice rough. "Where did you—" Emma's hand instinctively went to the medallion, wrapping her fingers around its worn surface. The familiar ridges and smooth back had been a source of comfort through countless nights in this very room. "It was my father's," she said softly, continuing to clean his wound with her free hand. The antiseptic smell filled the air between them. "He never took it off," said Street. "Christopher would keep him safe on the road." Mateo's fingers twitched on the sheets, as if he wanted to reach for it. His recovery was slow. Each night he gained a little more strength, but movement was still difficult, especially this early after the day's paralysis had worn off. "Your father," he said, swallowing hard. "What was his name?" "Marco Rossi." Emma smiled sadly, remembering her father's warm laugh, the way he'd swing her up onto his shoulders. "He was a driver for some wealthy family. I was 7 when he died. Car accident," they said. The monitor's beeping increased again, and Emma glanced at it with professional concern. Mateo's eyes had filled with tears, one, escaping to trail down his cheek. His reaction startled her. She'd never seen him show such raw emotion before. "Mateo?" She set aside the cleaning supplies, worried. "Are you in pain? Should I—" "No." He cut her off, his voice thick with emotion. "Just the medallion. I've seen one like it before." Emma frowned, studying his face in the dim light. There was something in his expression she couldn't quite read. Grief, maybe, or guilt? But that made no sense. Why would her father's medallion affect him so deeply? She wanted to ask more questions, but years of nursing experience had taught her when to push and when to wait. Whatever was causing this reaction, Mateo wasn't ready to share it. His eyes remained fixed on the medallion, as if it held answers to questions she didn't even know to ask. The night sounds of the hospital filtered through the closed door. Distant footsteps, the soft ding of an elevator, the squeak of a cart's wheels. In their little bubble of quiet, the tension stretched between them like a living thing. Emma tucked the medallion back beneath her scrubs, and Mateo's eyes finally met hers. There was something different in them now, something that made her heart beat faster. But before she could analyze it too deeply, he closed his eyes, exhaustion evident in every line of his face. She didn't press him for answers, though curiosity burned through her. Instead, she finished cleaning his wound in silence, her father's medallion once again a familiar weight against her heart. The moonlight filtered through the hospital window, casting long shadows across Mateo's face as he struggled to sit up slightly in his bed. Emma moved to help him, but his eyes held her in place, filled with a weight she couldn't understand. "Your father?" Mateo's voice cracked with emotion. "Marco Rossi wasn't just any driver. He worked for my family, the Castellanos." Emma's knees weakened, and she sank into the chair beside his bed. The Castellano name, it was infamous in their city, whispered in fear and awe. Her mind reeled, trying to reconcile her gentle father with the brutal world of organized crime. "I was 8 years old," Mateo continued, his words coming slower now, each one measured and heavy with memory. "We were leaving a restaurant, my father, Marco, and me. There were men waiting, gunmen from a rival family." Emma's hands trembled as she gripped the arms of her chair. The medallion around her neck felt suddenly heavy, like it was pulling her down into this new reality. "Marco saw them first." Mateo's voice grew hoarse. He didn't hesitate. "When they opened fire, he threw himself in front of me, took 3 bullets that were meant for me." The room seemed to spin around Emma. Her father's face flashed in her mind, his warm smile, the way he'd kiss her forehead before leaving for work. All this time, she'd believed he'd died in a simple car accident. Her mother had told her. "My mother," Emma whispered. She was protecting you," Mateo said softly, "from knowing the truth about our world. Your father was a hero, Emma. He saved my life." Tears spilled down Emma's cheeks. She couldn't stop them, didn't even try. 15 years of believing one truth, only to have it shattered in a single moment. Her father hadn't just been a driver. He'd been a protector, a guardian, a man willing to die for what he believed in. "There's more," Mateo said, his eyes never leaving her face. "Your father, he was smart, careful. He knew the risks of working for my family. He set up a trust fund for you, Emma. For your future." Emma's breath caught in her throat. Her years of struggling through nursing school, the crushing weight of student loans that still haunted her, all of it flashed through her mind. "All. My mother." Mateo's jaw clenched, anger seeping into his words. "She found ways to access it after your father's death. She embezzled everything, the money that was meant for your education, your future. It's why I've been searching for you, trying to make it right." The betrayal cut deep, not just of Vittoria's theft, but of all the years of lies. Emma's fingers found her father's medallion again, clinging to it like an anchor in a storm of revelations. "When the accident happened," Mateo continued, his voice softening, "when I realized who you were, I couldn't believe it. All this time searching, and you were right here, taking care of me." Emma stood abruptly, needing to move, to breathe. Her feet carried her to the window, where the city lights blurred through her tears. Behind her, she could hear Mateo's labored breathing, could feel the weight of his gaze. Her father had died a hero's death, saving the boy who would become one of the most powerful men in the city. And all these years later, that same man lay in her care, weakened and dependent on her help, while his own mother plotted his death. The irony wasn't lost on her, how the threads have paired. Their lives had become so intricately tangled, how her father's sacrifice created a bond between them that transcended time and circumstance. And now, learning that everything she'd struggled for, every penny she'd scraped together for her education, had been stolen by the very woman who visited this room each day, playing the role of concerned mother. Emma's world tilted on its axis as she stood by the hospital window, her father's medallion clutched tightly in her trembling hand. The city lights blurred through her tears, creating halos that reminded her of the way her father used to describe angels watching over them. But now, those childhood memories were tainted with the weight of truth. Her father hadn't been just a simple driver, but a hero who died protecting the man who now lay vulnerable in her care. "I don't understand," she whispered, more to herself than to Mateo. All these years, my mother never said anything about a trust fund. Behind her, she heard Mateo shift in his bed, the sheets rustling softly. The money was substantial. His voice was rough with emotion. Enough to put you through medical school if that's what you'd wanted. My father made sure of it. Your father's sacrifice meant everything to him. Emma turned back to face him, taking in his weakened state. Despite his vulnerability, there was still power in his presence, in the intensity of his gaze. The machines beeped steadily in the background, a reminder of the precarious situation they were both in. Your mother, she said, walking slowly back to his bedside. She visits every day, acting so concerned. How can someone do that to their own son? Mateo's jaw clenched. Power corrupts Emma. She wants control of the family, and she'll destroy anyone who stands in her way, even her own blood. The weight of responsibility settled on Emma's shoulders. Here she was, a simple nurse, suddenly thrust into a world of betrayal and danger. Yet as she looked at Mateo, they felt something stir inside her. A mix of duty to her father's memory and an undeniable pull toward the man whose life he had saved. I'm scared, she admitted, sinking into the chair beside his bed. I don't know anything about this world. Your world. Mateo's hand found hers, his grip weak but determined. You're stronger than you know. Your father's blood runs through your veins. I've watched you these past weeks, heard you talk to me when you thought I couldn't hear. You have his heart, his courage. Heat crept up Emma's neck at the reminder of all the private thoughts she'd shared with him during his supposed coma. She'd told him everything, her fears, her dreams, her loneliness, and he'd heard it all. We need evidence, he said, his voice growing urgent. Doctor, Russo keeps detailed records of the drugs they're using. My mother's financial transactions, the proof of what she stole from you. It's all there, hidden in plain sight. But I can't get to any of it like this. Emma's heart raced at the implications. You want me to help you gather evidence against your mother? I need you to help me survive, he corrected, his fingers tightening around hers. During the day, when the drugs have me paralyzed, I need you to keep pretending I'm still in a coma, but at night. His voice trailed off as exhaustion seemed to overtake him. At night? Emma prompted, leaning closer. At night, we work together. But Emma, his eyes locked with hers, intense despite his weakness. My mother is dangerous. If she suspects anything, she won't hesitate to eliminate what she sees as a threat. Before Emma could respond, Mateo lifted his trembling hand to her face, drawing her closer. His lips met hers in a kiss that was gentler than their first, filled with a tenderness that made her heart ache. When he pulled back, she saw in his eyes all the danger and passion that lay ahead. She knew in that moment that there was no going back. She was already too deeply involved. In this dangerous game, in the quest for justice, in whatever this thing was growing between them. The simple life she'd known was over, replaced by something far more complex and treacherous. Emma stared at her reflection in the hospital bathroom mirror, her fingers tracing the worn edges of her father's Street Christopher medallion. Dark circles rimmed her eyes from nights of broken sleep, worry etching lines around her mouth that hadn't been there weeks ago. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across her face, making her look as haunted as she felt. What would you do, Dad? She whispered, pressing the medallion to her lips. The metal was warm from being clutched in her palm, a familiar comfort that now carried the weight of new meaning. Not just a simple keepsake anymore, but a symbol of sacrifice and heroism she'd never known about. The truth of her father's death, taking a bullet meant for young Mateo, changed everything. She'd spent years imagining him as just another working man, a driver who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. But he'd been so much more, a protector, a hero. And now, here she was, standing in front of the same choice: help Mateo or walk away. Her hands trembled as she tucked the medallion back under her scrubs. The cool metal settled against her skin like a reminder of the responsibility she now carried. The trust fund her father had set aside for her, stolen by Vittoria Castellano, represented more than just money. It was her father's last attempt to secure her future, to protect her even after death. Emma splashed cold water on her face, trying to steady her nerves. The hospital's night shift was quieter than usual, the halls empty except for the occasional squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum. She'd chosen this profession to help people, to make a difference. But nothing in her training had prepared her for this, for being pulled into a world of mafia politics and attempted murder. Matteo's kiss still lingered on her lips, a ghost of sensation that made her chest tight with conflicting emotions. He was dangerous. She knew that. The son of a mafia boss, raised in a world of violence and power. And yet, when he looked at her with those pain-filled eyes, when his weakened hands reached for hers in the darkness, she saw something else, something vulnerable and human that called to her own lonely heart. She gathered her supplies for Matteo's evening care, fresh towels, basin, soap. Each item felt heavier than usual, weighted with the knowledge of what she was really doing. This wasn't just routine patient care anymore. It was a cover, a chance to help him regain his strength while maintaining the illusion of his coma. The night nurse at the station barely glanced up as Emma passed, too engrossed in paperwork to notice how her colleague's hands shook slightly. How many more nights could they keep this up? How long before someone noticed something was wrong? Dr. Russo's strange behavior, Vittoria's too perfect concern. It all seemed so obvious now that she knew the truth. Walking down the dimly lit corridor toward Matteo's room, Emma felt like she was moving through a dream. The familiar hospital setting had transformed into something sinister, full of shadows and secrets. Every security camera felt like an eye watching her, every late-night visitor a potential threat. She paused outside his door, her hand resting on the handle. This was her last chance to walk away, to return to her simple life of 12-hour shifts and quiet evenings alone. But she knew she couldn't. Her father hadn't walked away when Matteo needed him, and neither would she. Inside, the room was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors. Matteo lay still, maintaining his act even though they were alone. Emma set down her supplies and drew the privacy curtain, her movements mechanical, but her heart racing. As she prepared the basin of warm water, she caught her reflection in the window. A nurse doing her job. Nothing more. But she knew better now. She was in too deep, tied to Matteo by bonds of debt, duty, and something else she wasn't ready to name. Emma's fingers trembled as she recorded Matteo's vital signs in his chart, her handwriting deliberately steady despite her racing heart. Doctor. Russo hovered nearby, watching her work with those cold, calculating eyes. She could feel his gaze burning into her back as she checked Matteo's IV lines. Everything looks stable, she said, keeping her voice professional and detached. Inside, her stomach churned at the sight of the clear liquid dripping into Matteo's veins, the poison that kept him paralyzed during daylight hours. Good, doctor, Russo muttered, scribbling his own notes. Mrs. Castellano will be pleased to hear it. Emma's grip tightened on her pen. Vittoria Castellano visited every afternoon like clockwork, playing the part of the grieving mother perfectly. Her designer clothes always immaculate, her tears carefully measured, her concerned questions precisely worded. It made Emma's skin crawl. Throughout her shift, Emma moved through her duties with mechanical precision, hyper-aware of every shadow, every whispered conversation. The weight of Matteo's medallion pressed against her chest beneath her scrubs, a constant reminder of what was at stake. She noticed the small things now. How Dr. Russo always administered Matteo's medication personally. How Vittoria's men lingered in the hallways during shift changes. How the security cameras seemed to track her movements. The hospital she'd once considered a sanctuary had become a maze of threats and secrets. During Vittoria's afternoon visit, Emma busied herself changing Matteo's sheets, her ears straining to catch every word. Vittoria sat beside her son's bed, one manicured hand resting on his arm. My poor boy, Vittoria cooed, her voice dripping with false sympathy. The doctors say there's been no improvement. Perhaps it's time we consider more permanent arrangements. Emma's hands froze mid-task. The threat in those words was clear as glass. She forced herself to keep moving, to maintain her facade of indifference, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. Nurse Rossi, Vittoria called out suddenly, making Emma jump. You've been caring for my son for quite some time now. Have you noticed any changes? Emma turned, meeting Vittoria's sharp gaze. The older woman's eyes were like shards of ice, probing for weakness. No significant changes, Mrs. Castellano. Just the usual fluctuations in vital signs. How dedicated you are. Vittoria smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Such a comfort to know he's in capable hands. The threat wasn't even veiled this time. Emma nodded and excused herself, her legs shaking as she left the room. In the medication room, she leaned against the wall, trying to steady her breathing. This was the game now. Every interaction a careful dance of deception, every word measured for hidden meanings. She watched Dr. Russo make his rounds, noting how he spoke in hushed tones with Vittoria's men when he thought no one was looking. She documented everything in her phone, encrypted notes that she would share with Matteo during the night shift. The strain was starting to show. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her colleagues had begun to notice her jumpiness. "You look exhausted." Sarah, another nurse, commented during lunch. "Maybe you should take some time off." Emma forced a smile. "Just need more sleep," she lied, knowing sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not when Matteo's life hung by a thread, not when every moment could bring discovery. As her shift drew to a close, Emma gathered her belongings from her locker, her movements slow and deliberate despite her exhaustion. The parking lot was dark when she emerged, the security lights casting long shadows between the cars. That's when she saw them. Dr. Russo and one of Vittoria's men, speaking in low voices near a black SUV. The man's jacket pulled back slightly, revealing the outline of a holstered gun. Emma ducked behind a concrete pillar, her heart in her throat. Dr. Russo handed the man something, a small package that disappeared quickly into his pocket. Emma pressed herself against the cold concrete, barely daring to breathe. She couldn't make out their words, but their body language spoke volumes. Whatever they were planning, it wasn't good. The knowledge settled in her stomach like lead. Matteo's life was still in danger, and now, so was hers. The night shift always felt different, quieter, more intimate, more dangerous. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Emma made her way down the empty corridor toward Matteo's room. Her footsteps echoed against the sterile floor, each click of her shoes making her more aware of how alone she was. She slipped into his room, her practiced movements betraying nothing of her inner turmoil. Matteo lay still, his chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm she'd grown so familiar with. During the day, the paralytic drugs kept him completely immobile. But now, in these precious night hours, she could sometimes see his fingers twitch. "I need to check your IV," she whispered, more for herself than for him. She knew he could hear her, even if he couldn't respond yet. The drugs were still too strong. Emma reached for the IV line, her trained eyes checking the flow rate. Something wasn't right. The solution looked different, more concentrated than usual. Her stomach knotted as she realized Dr. Russo must have changed the dosage. Just as she began to adjust the drip rate, a shadow fell across the bed. "Nurse Rossi." Dr. Russo's voice cut through the quiet like a knife. Emma's fingers froze on the IV line, her heart stuttering in her chest. She hadn't heard him approach. "Doctor," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I was just checking his lines." Dr. Russo moved, closer, his perfectly pressed lab coat rustling with each step. His eyes, sharp behind his wire-rimmed glasses, fixed on her hands. "At this hour, the night rounds aren't scheduled for another 2 hours. Emma forced herself to continue her movements, making them deliberate and professional. "I noticed some irregularities in his vital signs. I wanted to make sure everything was flowing correctly." "Irregularities?" His voice took on an edge that made her skin crawl. "I didn't see anything concerning in his chart. Just small fluctuations," Emma said, her mind racing to construct a believable explanation. "Nothing major, but with long-term coma patients, even minor changes can be significant." "Doctor," Russo stepped closer, invading her space. The antiseptic smell of his cologne mixed with hospital disinfectant made her nose burn. "You seem very invested in Mr. Castellano's care." "I'm invested in all my patients, doctor." Emma met his gaze, willing her hands not to shake. She could feel Matteo's presence behind her, knowing he was listening, probably fighting against the drugs to move, to help her, but he couldn't, not yet. She was on her own. "Of course," Dr. Russo smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Still, perhaps we should review the proper protocols for overnight care. We wouldn't want any mistakes to happen." The threat in his words was clear. Emma nodded, her throat tight. "I appreciate your concern, doctor. I'll be sure to document everything in his chart. See that you do." He picked up Matteo's chart, flipping through it with exaggerated attention. "Mrs. Castellano is very particular about her son's care. We wouldn't want to disappoint her." Emma's fingers tingled with the urge to pull the IV line completely, to stop the poison flowing into Matteo's veins. But she couldn't. Not with Dr. Russo watching her every move. One wrong gesture, one suspicious action, and everything would unravel. "I understand," she said, forcing herself to step away from the IV stand. "I'll wait for the scheduled rounds." Dr. Russo watched her for a long moment, his eyes calculating. Finally, he placed the chart back and headed for the door. "Good night, Nurse Rossi. Do try to stick to the schedule. It's better for everyone that way." Emma stood frozen until his footsteps faded down the hallway. Only then did she allow herself to breathe, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of Matteo's bed. She could feel the rapid thump of her heart against her ribs, so loud she worried someone might hear it. She looked down at Matteo, saw the slight tension around his eyes, the only sign he could give that he was aware, that he understood the danger they were in. They'd been careless, and now Dr. Russo was suspicious. One more mistake like this, and everything would fall apart. Emma's fingers trembled as she adjusted Matteo's blanket, still shaken from Dr. Russo's earlier visit. The midnight hours stretched before them, the hospital quiet except for the steady beeping of monitors. Tonight felt different. The air was thick with tension and unspoken words. "Your hands are shaking," Matteo observed, his voice barely above a whisper. The drugs were wearing off enough for him to speak, though his movements remained limited. "I'm fine," Emma lied, busying herself with checking his vitals for the 100th time. The numbers hadn't changed, but it gave her something to focus on besides the way his presence affected her. "Emma." Her name on his lips made her pause. "Look at me." She turned, meeting his dark eyes. Even weakened by drugs and confinement, Matteo commanded attention. The moonlight filtering through the window cast shadows across his face, highlighting his sharp cheekbones and the stubble along his jaw. "Russo suspects something," she admitted, perching on the edge of his bed. "I need to be more careful." "We need to be more careful," he corrected. With visible effort, he lifted his hand from the bed. Emma watched the movement, knowing how much strength it took him to fight against the lingering effects of the drugs. His fingers found hers, wrapping around them with surprising warmth. The touch sent electricity shooting up her arm, making her breath catch. His grip was shaky but determined, like everything else about him. "I didn't expect this," he murmured, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm. The intimate gesture made her heart race. "When I was searching for Marco Rossi's daughter, I never imagined." Emma swallowed hard. "Imagined what?" "That you would be like this. Strong, brave." His eyes held hers. "Beautiful." The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. Emma felt her cheeks flush, grateful for the dim lighting. She should pull away. It wasn't professional, wasn't safe. But Matteo's touch anchored her, made her feel less alone in this dangerous game they were playing. "I'm scared," she confessed, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "Not just of getting caught. I'm scared of." She trailed off, unable to voice the rest. Scared of these feelings. Scared of wanting something she shouldn't. Matteo's fingers tightened on hers. "I know." His voice was rough with emotion. "Every time you walk out that door, every time Russo or my mother comes in, I'm terrified they'll discover what you mean to me." The admission stunned her. This was Matteo Castellano, the man who'd built an empire on fear and power. Yet here he was, vulnerable and honest, his hand holding hers like she was something precious. "We can't," Emma whispered, even as her body betrayed her, leaning closer to him. "This is already complicated enough." "Everything about this is complicated," he agreed. "But some things are worth the risk." His words resonated through her, stirring feelings she'd been trying to suppress. The chemistry between them was undeniable, had been since that first desperate kiss. Now, with his hand in hers and his eyes full of unspoken promises, it felt impossible to ignore. Emma pulled her hand away, the loss of contact leaving her cold. She needed to think clearly, to remember the stakes. Matteo's life hung in the balance, and her growing feelings for him could jeopardize everything. Matteo's eyes never left her face, intense despite his weakened state. "I won't let anyone hurt you," he whispered hoarsely, the words carrying both a promise and a warning. Her heart skipped a beat at the fierce protection in his voice, but she forced herself to focus. The mission had to come first. The danger was growing by the day, and these feelings, whatever they were, only made everything more complicated. The night shift dragged on, each hour marked by the steady beeping of monitors and Mateo's increasingly labored breathing. Emma watched him from her station, her heart clenching as she noticed the new hollows beneath his cheekbones, the way his hospital gown hung looser on his frame. "Your temperature's up again," she murmured, checking the readout. Her fingers brushed against his forehead, feeling the slight warmth there. The drugs are taking their toll. Mateo's eyes flickered open, darker than usual against his pale skin. "Tell me what they gave me today." Emma pulled out her small notebook, where she'd been documenting every medication, every suspicious interaction. "Doctor, Russo added something new to your IV this morning. I managed to get a sample, but..." She hesitated, biting her lip. "Mateo, they're increasing the dosage." He tried to nod, the movement barely perceptible. "My mother," getting impatient. The weakness in his voice scared her. 3 weeks had passed since he'd first opened his eyes, since that desperate kiss had changed everything. Each day, she watched him fight against the cocktail of drugs they pumped into his system, but she could see him losing ground. Emma adjusted his pillows, using the moment to hide the tremor in her hands. "I've been tracking the changes in your vital signs. Your heart rate drops dangerously low during peak dosage hours." She pulled her father's medallion from beneath her scrubs, clutching it for strength. "If they keep increasing it." "I know." His fingers twitched on the blanket, seeking hers. She took his hand, feeling how cold his skin had become. "Emma, if something happens, don't." The word came out sharper than she intended. "I'm not letting you give up." A ghost of his usual smirk crossed his face. "Still, giving me orders?" "Someone has to." She tried to smile back, but worry gnawed at her. She'd been sneaking samples of his medication to a private lab, documenting every suspicious change in his condition. But would it be enough? Would she be able to gather the evidence they needed before Vittoria's poison claimed her son? The night stretched on, and Emma found herself watching the rise and fall of Mateo's chest, counting each breath like a prayer. His moments of lucidity were becoming shorter, the periods of paralysis longer. She'd started timing her care around the medication schedule, trying to give him whatever comfort she could during the brief windows when he could move. "Talk to me," he whispered, fighting to keep his eyes open. "Your voice helps." Emma perched on the edge of his bed, still holding his hand. "What should I talk about?" "Emma, anything. Tell me about your day." She began speaking softly about mundane things. The weather, the flowers blooming in the hospital garden, the book she was reading. But her mind kept straying to the growing collection of evidence in her apartment, the careful notes she'd been taking. Would it be enough to save him? Mateo's grip on her hand weakened as exhaustion pulled at him. Even these brief conversations drained what little strength he had left. Emma watched helplessly as his eyes fluttered closed, knowing there was nothing she could do to ease his struggle. The weight of it all crashed over her suddenly, the constant fear of discovery, the growing feelings she couldn't deny, the knowledge that his life literally rested in her hands. She was in too deep now, caught between her duty as a nurse and her desperate need to protect him. Looking down at their joined hands, Emma realized she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. This wasn't just about justice for her father anymore, or even about saving Mateo's life. Somewhere along the way, between the whispered conversations and stolen touches, she'd started to care for him in a way that terrified her. She was trapped now, as surely as he was. And as the storm of Vittoria's revenge gathered strength, Emma wondered if either of them would survive what was coming. Emma noticed him first in the hospital cafeteria. A tall, broad-shouldered man in an impeccable suit, out of place among the scrubs and white coats. Antonio, Mateo's bodyguard. He wasn't looking at her, but she felt his presence like a weight on her shoulders. Later, she spotted another man near the nurses' station, pretending to read a magazine but watching everything. In the parking lot, a black SUV with tinted windows. They were everywhere, these shadows of the underworld, and they were all watching her. During her rounds, Emma's hands shook as she checked on other patients. Every face seemed suspicious now. Was that visitor really a patient's family member, or another of Vittoria's spies? Even the other nurse's innocent questions about Mateo's condition made her pulse quicken. "Nurse Rossi." Antonio's deep voice startled her as she exited a supply closet. He stood in the dim hallway, his expression grave. "We need to talk." Emma glanced around nervously. "I'm working." Take your break now." It wasn't a request. They walked to a quiet corner of the hospital garden. Despite the sunny afternoon, Emma felt cold. Antonio stood between her and the building, shielding their conversation from prying eyes. "You're being watched," he said without preamble. "I know." Emma wrapped her arms around herself. Dr. Russo. Not just him. Antonio's dark eyes scanned the perimeter. "The Castellano family has many enemies. They're all circling now, like vultures, waiting to see if Matteo lives or dies. And they've noticed you." Emma's throat went dry. "Me?" "The dedicated nurse who never leaves his side." Antonio's voice was low, careful. "The one who adjusts his medications, who spends hours in his room during the night shift. People are asking questions." The reality of her situation hit Emma like a physical blow. She wasn't just caught between Matteo and his mother anymore. She was caught in the crosshairs of an entire criminal empire. "What?" She cleared her throat, tried again. "What do they think I'm doing?" "Some think you're Vittoria's spy, making sure the job gets done. Others think you're working for a rival family." Antonio's expression softened slightly. "The truth that you're trying to save him would get you killed faster than either accusation." Emma sank onto a nearby bench, her legs weak. "I can't just stop helping him." "No," Antonio agreed, "but you need to be more careful. Vittoria is getting impatient. She expected this to be over by now." "The new medications," Emma whispered. "They're killing him slowly." Antonio nodded grimly. "She wants it to look natural." A grieving mother, finally accepting that her son will never wake up, making the difficult decision to let him go. His hands clenched into fists. She's planning something. Something soon. Emma thought of Matteo's increasing weakness, the way he struggled more each night to stay conscious. "How much time do we have?" "Not enough." Antonio glanced at his watch. "Things will get much worse before they get better. Watch your back, Nurse Rossi, and watch his." He turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. If anyone approaches you, anyone claiming to be Matteo's friend or ally, don't trust them. Right now, the only people you can trust are in this garden." Emma watched him walk away, her mind racing. She had known she was in danger, but this was different. This was bigger than she had imagined. The weight of it pressed down on her chest until she could barely breathe. A nurse called her name from the hospital entrance. Her break was over. Emma stood on shaky legs, straightened her scrubs, and walked back into the building. With each step, she felt the eyes on her, watching, waiting, wondering whose side she was really on. The steady beep of the heart monitor felt like a countdown in Emma's ears. She watched the green line jump across the screen, each peak slightly weaker than the last. Matteo's vital signs were deteriorating, just as Dr. Russo had planned. Emma's fingers trembled as she checked Matteo's chart for the 100th time. The numbers didn't lie. His body was giving up. The cocktail of drugs they were forcing into his system was slowly shutting down his organs. She could see it in the way his skin had taken on a grayish tinge, in how his breathing seemed more labored with each passing hour. "Just hold on," she whispered when she was alone with him during her rounds. "Please, just hold on a little longer." During the day shift, she maintained her professional facade, but inside, her stomach churned with anxiety. Every time Dr. Russo entered the room, she had to stop herself from flinching. He would check Matteo's vitals, make notes in his chart, and adjust the IV drip with practiced precision, all while slowly poisoning him. The worst part was watching Vittoria's daily visits. The woman would sweep into the room in designer clothes that cost more than Emma made in a month, playing the part of the grieving mother perfectly. She would stroke Matteo's hair, whisper words of false comfort, all while knowing she was orchestrating his death. Emma's hands shook as she prepared Matteo's morning care routine. She couldn't mess up, couldn't show any sign that something was wrong. The other nurses had started giving her odd looks. She knew she appeared too invested, too concerned about one patient, but she couldn't help it. Every minute felt like walking on a knife's edge. The IV bag needed changing. Emma moved with deliberate slowness, checking and double-checking everything. She had to be careful. One wrong move, and the delicate balance of medications keeping Matteo alive would be disrupted. Her fingers worked methodically, disconnecting the empty bag and preparing the new one. Her heart raced as she made subtle adjustments to the flow rate, just enough to dilute the poison they were feeding him. but not enough to be noticeable in his blood work. She had learned to time these adjustments carefully, always when Dr. Russo was off duty and Vittoria was away. The door handle turned. Emma's breath caught in her throat as Sarah, one of the day shift nurses, walked in. Sarah paused, her eyes narrowing at the sight of Emma adjusting the IV. "Everything okay?" Sarah asked, her tone carefully neutral. Emma forced her hands to stay steady. "Just changing his fluids," she said, grateful her voice didn't shake. The bag was almost empty. Sarah moved closer, glancing at the IV setup. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. Had she noticed the slight adjustment to the flow rate? Would she report it to Dr. Russo? "You've been spending a lot of time with this patient," Sarah observed, picking up Matteo's chart. Emma shrugged, trying to appear casual. "He reminds me of my brother," she lied, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. "Same age, you know? It just hits close to home." She busied herself with checking Matteo's vitals, hyper-aware of Sarah's presence behind her. The other nurse made notes in the chart, her pen scratching against paper like fingernails on a chalkboard to Emma's overwrought nerves. "His stats are lower today," Sarah commented. "Yes," Emma agreed, her throat tight. She knew exactly why. Dr. Russo had increased the dosage yesterday. Dr. Russo is monitoring it. Sarah hung the chart back on the bed. "Don't get too attached, Emma. You know how these cases usually end." Emma nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She adjusted Matteo's blanket, using the moment to compose herself. When she turned back, Sarah was still watching her, a mixture of concern and suspicion in her eyes. "I should check on my other patients," Emma said, moving toward the door. She could feel Sarah's gaze following her, heavy with unasked questions. The midnight silence wrapped around them like a thick blanket, broken only by the steady beep of monitors. Emma sat beside Matteo's bed, watching his chest rise and fall with each labored breath. His eyes, usually sharp despite his weakness, were heavy with exhaustion. "I've spent years," he whispered, his voice rough, planning every detail, waiting for the right moment to take her down. His fingers twitched on the blanket, seeking strength that wasn't there. "My mother. She's destroyed everything my father built." Emma reached for the water cup, helping him take small sips. His lips were cracked, his skin pale under the harsh hospital lights. "You need to rest," she murmured, but Matteo shook his head. "Can't rest. Not now." His words came out strained, each one a battle against his weakening body. "Everything I've built, the legitimate businesses, the clean money. I wanted to make something better than what came before." Emma's hand found his, her thumb stroking across his knuckles. The gesture had become familiar over their nights together, a small comfort in this sterile room that had become their sanctuary. His skin felt cool to the touch, another sign of his deteriorating condition. "My father," Matteo's voice cracked. "He wanted more for me than just violence and fear. The old ways, they're dying. I was changing things, making them better." His eyes closed briefly, pain flickering across his features. "But my mother, she wants the old ways, the blood and brutality." Emma checked his vitals, noting how his blood pressure had dropped again. The poison was working its way through his system, slowly but surely. "You're not alone in this," she reminded him softly, adjusting his pillow. A bitter smile crossed his face. "Look at me now," the great Matteo Castellano, brought down by his own mother. His hand trembled as he reached up to touch her cheek. "Everything I've worked for, it could all crumble. And the worst part?" His eyes met hers, filled with a pain that went beyond physical. "I don't even care about losing the empire anymore. I just want." He didn't finish the sentence, but Emma felt the weight of his unspoken words. She saw it in the way his gaze lingered on her face, in the gentle brush of his fingers against her skin. This dangerous, powerful man had become something else in these quiet night hours. Vulnerable, human, real. "The medication's starting to kick in," she noted, watching his eyelids grow heavier. The cocktail of drugs would soon pull him under, leaving him paralyzed and helpless for another day. "Emma," he murmured, fighting against the encroaching darkness. "I never meant to drag you into this. Your father. He protected me once. Now I've put his daughter in danger." "Shh," she soothed, running her fingers through his dark hair. "We'll figure this out. Together." His breathing began to even out, the drugs taking hold. "Stay safe," he whispered, his words slurring slightly. "They're watching. Always watching." Emma waited until his eyes closed completely, until his hand went limp in hers. The monitors showed his vitals dropping to the artificially low levels that had become his daily prison. Standing slowly, she straightened his blankets one last time. At the door, she paused, looking back at his still form. In sleep, the weight of his burden seemed to press him deeper into the mattress. The mighty Castellano heir, reduced to this, and all because of his own mother's betrayal. With a heavy heart, Emma stepped into the hallway, knowing that somewhere in this very hospital, Vittoria Castellano's people were watching, waiting, plotting her son's destruction. And if they discovered Emma's role in keeping him alive, she knew her fate would be sealed alongside his. Emma's phone vibrated in her pocket as she finished charting her morning rounds. The message was brief. "Coffee shop across from Street Michael's. 30 minutes. Her stomach clenched. Antonio never contacted her directly, it was too risky. Whatever had prompted this meeting couldn't be good. She glanced at Matteo's still form, his chest rising and falling in the artificial rhythm forced by the drugs. The morning sun cast long shadows across his face, making him look even more vulnerable. "I'll be back," she whispered, though she knew he couldn't hear her during these daytime hours. The coffee shop was small and dimly lit despite the morning hour. The smell of coffee beans and pastries filled the air, but Emma's churning stomach couldn't handle the thought of food. She spotted Antonio in a corner booth, his broad shoulders hunched over a steaming cup. "You weren't followed?" he asked without looking up as she slid into the seat across from him. "No. I took the long way, like you taught me." Emma's hands fidgeted with a paper napkin. "What's wrong? You wouldn't risk meeting me unless it's worse than we thought." Antonio's voice was low, his eyes scanning the nearly empty cafe. "Dr. Russo met with Vittoria last night. I had someone watching." A waitress approached their table, but Antonio waved her away with a subtle gesture. Emma noticed his knuckles were bruised, fresh cuts barely scabbed over. He'd been fighting recently. "They're moving up their timeline," he continued. "Vittoria's getting impatient. The family's starting to ask questions about Matteo's condition, and she's losing her grip on some of the more loyal captains." Emma's fingers twisted the napkin tighter. "What are they planning?" Antonio leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dr. Russo's ordered a new batch of the sedative, triple the usual dose. They're planning to administer it during tomorrow morning's treatment." The napkin tore in Emma's hands. "Triple? That would stop his heart." Antonio's face was grim. "That's the point. They'll make it look like his body finally gave out. Natural causes. No one would question it after such a long coma." Emma felt the room spin. She'd known Vittoria was cruel, but to murder her own son? "We have to stop them. We have to—" "Keep your voice down," Antonio warned, though his eyes softened with sympathy. "This isn't just about Matteo anymore. If they succeed, everything dies with him. The reform plans, the legitimate businesses, all of it. Vittoria will put his younger brother in charge, a puppet she can control." "And what about the trust fund? My father's money?" Emma asked, though she already knew the answer. "Gone forever, along with anyone who knows the truth about it." Antonio's meaning was clear. Emma would be next. Through the window, Emma watched people hurrying past, going about their normal lives. How strange that the world kept turning while she sat here, learning about murder plots and mafia power plays. "When?" Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "Tomorrow. During the morning treatment. Dr. Russo always insists on administering it himself, now we know why." Antonio pushed a small flip phone across the table. "Burner phone. My number's the only one in it. If anything changes, if you see anything suspicious, call immediately." Emma pocketed the phone, its weight like a stone against her thigh. "What do we do?" "For now, nothing changes. You keep playing your part. Keep watching. But tomorrow—" Antonio's face hardened. "Tomorrow, we'll have to be ready." The magnitude of what was coming settled over Emma like a heavy blanket. One way or another, everything would change tomorrow. She thought of Matteo, lying, helpless in his hospital bed, unaware that his own mother had scheduled his execution. "He trusts you," Antonio said quietly. "More than he's trusted anyone since his father died. Don't let that trust be misplaced." Emma's footsteps echoed through the empty hospital corridor as she made her way back from the coffee shop. The weight of Antonio's burner phone pressed against her thigh with each step, a constant reminder of what was at stake. Her hands trembled as she pulled her ID badge from her pocket, swiping into the staff area. The morning shift bustled around her, nurses exchanging reports and orderlies wheeling patients to various tests. Everything seemed so normal, yet nothing was. These people had no idea they were working in the middle of a deadly power play. She stopped at the nurses' station, pretending to review charts while watching Dr. Russo's office door. Through the Venetian blinds, she could see his silhouette moving about, preparing for his morning rounds. Her stomach churned as she remembered Antonio's words about the triple dose. They were planning to kill Matteo tomorrow, right here in this hospital, and make it look like a tragic but expected outcome. Emma? Sarah, one of the day shift nurses, touched her arm. "You okay? You look pale." Emma forced a smile, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Just tired. Long night. You should go home and rest." Sarah's concern was genuine, which only made Emma feel worse about lying to her. "You've been pulling so many extra shifts with the Castellano patient." The Castellano patient. If only Sarah knew that the Castellano patient was fully conscious at night, that his own mother was trying to murder him, that Emma had fallen deeply into a world of violence and betrayal because of him. "Actually," Emma said, an idea forming, "I needed to speak with Dr. Russo about his treatment plan before I leave. Have you seen him?" "He's reviewing tomorrow's procedures." Sarah nodded toward his office. "Better. Catch him now before he starts rounds." Emma gathered her courage, straightening her scrubs. She had to find proof of what they were planning. The new medication order had to be documented somewhere. If she could get access to his computer, his files, the walk to Dr. Russo's office felt like moving through molasses. Each step brought her closer to either salvation or destruction. If she was caught snooping, she'd lose more than just her job. Vittoria's reach was long, and her revenge would be brutal. She paused outside his door, pretending to organize papers while listening. Dr. Russo was on the phone, his voice muffled but angry. "Yes, tomorrow morning. Everything's arranged. No, there won't be any complications. The nurse? Don't worry about her. Yes, I'll handle it personally." Emma's blood ran cold. Were they talking about her? Did they suspect something? The medallion around her neck felt heavy, her father's presence both a comfort and a reminder of how much she had to lose. A glance at her watch showed 7:45 a.m., 15 minutes until Dr. Russo would begin his rounds. 15 minutes to find evidence of their plan. 15 minutes to save Matteo's life. She touched the burner phone in her pocket, drawing strength from knowing Antonio was just a call away. But she had to do this part alone. No one else could get close enough to Dr. Russo's records without raising suspicion. Taking a deep breath, Emma raised her hand to knock on the office door. Her knuckles hovered inches from the wood as doubt crept in. Was she really ready to do this? To risk everything? She thought of Matteo's weak touch in the darkness, of his trust in her, of her father's sacrifice all those years ago. The decision was made. She had to act now, before it was too late. Her hand was clammy with fear as she prepared to knock, knowing that once she entered that office, there would be no turning back. The midnight silence shattered as Matteo's body jerked violently in the hospital bed. Emma rushed to his side, her heart pounding against her ribs. This wasn't like his usual nighttime awakening, something was different. His muscles tensed and coiled beneath her touch as she tried to steady him. "Matteo?" she whispered, panic rising in her throat. His eyes snapped open, but they weren't clouded with weakness anymore. They blazed with a dangerous intensity that made her step back. The machines around him began beeping frantically as his vital signs spiked. "Get Antonio," he growled, his voice stronger than she'd ever heard it. Gone was the whispered weakness of the past weeks. This was the voice of a man who commanded armies. Emma fumbled for the burner phone, her hands shaking as she dialed. Before she could complete the call, Matteo's hand shot out and gripped her wrist. His touch was firm, nothing like the trembling caresses she'd grown used to. "The poison it's wearing off," he said, pushing himself up to sitting position. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he fought against months of muscle atrophy. Mother dearest miscalculated. She thought increasing the dose would finish me off, but my body's been building resistance. The door handle rattled, and Emma's heart stopped. "Doctor." Russo's voice carried through the wood, speaking to someone in the hallway. Matteo's eyes narrowed, his jaw clenching with predatory focus. "Hide," he commanded, releasing her wrist. "Now." Emma ducked into the small bathroom just as the door opened. Through the crack, she watched Dr. Russo enter, followed by two men in suits, Vittoria's guards. The doctor approached Matteo's bed, syringe in hand, completely unaware that his patient was no longer helpless. "Time for your medication, Mr. Castellano." "Doctor," Russo said, his voice dripping with false concern. "Your mother wants to make sure you're comfortable." Matteo remained still, his eyes closed, playing the part of the comatose patient one final time. As doctor, Russo leaned in with the syringe. Matteo's hand shot up, grabbing the doctor's throat with crushing force. "Comfortable?" Matteo's voice was pure ice. "Like you made my father comfortable before he died?" The guards reached for their weapons, but Matteo was faster. With strength that seemed impossible after months of paralysis, he yanked Dr. Russo forward, using him as a shield while reaching under the mattress, where Emma had hidden his gun earlier that week. The bathroom door creaked as Emma peeked out, unable to look away. This was Matteo Castellano as the world knew him: deadly, powerful, and completely in control. His movements were precise despite his weakened state, each action calculated for maximum effect. "Drop your weapons," he ordered the guards, pressing the gun to Dr. Russo's temple, "or I paint these walls with the good doctor's brain matter." The guards hesitated, their training warring with their fear. Matteo's finger tightened on the trigger. Now, the clatter of guns hitting the floor echoed through the room. Matteo's smile was all predator, no trace of the vulnerable man Emma had nursed through the nights. "Emma," he called out, never taking his eyes off his captives. "Call Antonio. Tell him it's time." She stepped out of the bathroom, phone already in hand. As she dialed, Matteo continued addressing his mother's men. "Your loyalty to Vittoria ends tonight," he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "You can either swear allegiance to me now, or join the doctor in whatever hole I'm about to throw him in." The hospital room had transformed into a war room, and Matteo, despite his hospital gown and months of imprisonment, commanded it like a throne room. The raw power emanating from him filled the space, making it hard to breathe. Antonio's voice crackled through the phone, and Emma watched as Matteo's empire began to reform around him, built on the ashes of his mother's betrayal. The mahogany doors of Vittoria Castellano's office crashed open, splintering against the walls. Matteo strode in, his hospital gown replaced by a tailored black suit that Antonio had brought. Despite months of bed rest, he moved like a predator, each step calculated and deadly. Emma pressed herself against the shadowed wall, her heart hammering against her ribs as she watched the man she'd nursed back to health transform into something terrifying and magnificent. Vittoria sat behind her massive desk, perfectly composed despite the violent entrance. Her silver hair was swept into an elegant chignon, her red lips curved in a cold smile. She looked more like a CEO than a mafia matriarch, but her eyes held the same dangerous glint as her son's. "Matteo, darling," she purred, setting down her fountain pen. "I see you've finally decided to join us among the living." "Save it, mother." Matteo's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Your little poisoning scheme failed, just like everything else you've tried since father died." Two of Vittoria's guards moved to intercept him, but Matteo barely glanced their way. Antonio and his men burst in behind him, weapons drawn. The guards froze, caught between loyalty and survival. "Drop your weapons," Antonio commanded. "Your choice is simple. Live under Don Castellano, or die under Donna Vittoria." Emma watched the power shift happen in real time. The guards exchanged looks, then slowly placed their guns on the ground. They stepped back, heads bowed to Matteo. The message was clear. The son had already won. Vittoria's smile didn't waver, but her fingers tightened around her pen. "You always were your father's son. So dramatic. So assured of your own power. I learned from the best." Matteo stalked closer to the desk. "You taught me that power isn't about strength. It's about patience. About waiting for the right moment to strike." His hands planted on the desk as he leaned forward. 3 months, mother. 3 months you kept me paralyzed, thinking you could break me. But all you did was give me time to plan your downfall." Emma's breath caught in her throat. The tension in the room was suffocating. She could see the family resemblance now, the same sharp features, the same calculating eyes. But where Vittoria's beauty was cold and artificial, Matteo's power burned hot and real. "Everything you built," Vittoria said softly. Everything you control. It all came from my careful planning. Your father was weak. He would have lost everything if I hadn't stepped in. I made this family what it is. No, Matteo's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. You destroyed this family. You killed father. You stole from loyal soldiers like Marco Rossi. You tried to murder your own son. His hand shot out, gripping Vittoria's throat. And now you're going to pay for every single betrayal. Emma gasped, unable to stop herself. Vittoria's eyes flicked to her hiding spot, a cruel smile playing on her lips despite Matteo's grip. Ah, the little nurse, she wheezed. Marco's daughter. How fitting that you'd align yourself with her. Your father always did have a weakness for strays. Matteo's grip tightened. Emma is worth 100 of you. She saved my life while you tried to end it. She honored her father's legacy while you tried to steal it. The office fell silent, except for Vittoria's labored breathing. Emma watched, transfixed, as mother and son stared each other down. This was the final battle, not with guns or violence, but with will against will, power against power. You won't kill me, Vittoria said finally. You're not strong enough. Matteo leaned closer, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. You're right. Death would be too easy. Instead, you're going to watch as I take back everything you stole. The family, the business, the respect, all of it. And you'll live, knowing that every single person in our world chose me over you. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of violence and retribution. Emma watched from the shadows as Matteo systematically dismantled his mother's network. Each betrayal was met with swift justice, each loyal soldier rewarded. The Castellano Empire transformed overnight, reshaping itself around its rightful leader. Dr. Russo was the first to fall. Antonio's men found him trying to flee the country, a briefcase full of cash in hand. They brought him back to face Matteo's judgment. Emma turned away when she heard the gunshot, her stomach churning. This was the price of justice in their world. Vittoria's allies scattered like rats from a sinking ship. Some begged for mercy. Others tried to fight. None succeeded. Matteo was ruthless in his purge, showing the same calculated precision she'd witnessed during their quiet nights in the hospital. But now, instead of weakness, he radiated power. Emma threw herself into her work at the hospital, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. But everything had changed. Guards shadowed her every move, a constant reminder of her new reality. Nurses, who'd once been friendly now, watched her with wary eyes, whispering when they thought she couldn't hear. You okay? Antonio asked one evening, catching her alone in the break room. His presence had become oddly comforting over the past few days, a steady anchor in the storm. I don't know, she admitted, clutching her coffee cup. This world, it's so different from everything I know. But Matteo isn't, Antonio said quietly. He's still the same man you helped save. Was he, though? Emma wasn't sure anymore. The tender, vulnerable patient who'd kissed her in the darkness seemed worlds away from the ruthless Don, who now commanded an empire. She'd seen both sides of him now, the softness and the steel, and she didn't know how to reconcile them. Later that night, she found Matteo in his office at the family compound. The room still bore traces of his mother's taste: crystal decanters, antique furniture, oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors. But there was something different about it now, something harder. Like the room itself had absorbed the violence of the past few days. Matteo stood at the window, his broad shoulders tense beneath his suit jacket. He turned when she entered, and for a moment, she caught a glimpse of exhaustion in his eyes before his mask slipped back into place. Emma, he breathed her name like a prayer. I wasn't sure you'd come. I almost didn't, she admitted, hovering near the door. The space between them felt vast, filled with unspoken words and fresh bloodshed. He crossed the room slowly, giving her time to retreat if she wanted, but she held her ground, chin lifted. She wasn't the same person who'd first walked into his hospital room all those months ago. She'd grown stronger, harder maybe. I know this isn't the world you chose, he said softly, stopping just inches from her. I know what I am, what I have to be. Frightens you. Not you, she corrected. What you do, yes. The violence, the revenge. But you've never frightened me, Matteo. His hand came up to cup her cheek, and she leaned into his touch despite herself. His skin was warm, familiar. This close, She could see the battle raging behind his eyes, the need to protect her warring with the desire to keep her close. "I wanted to shield you from this," he murmured, "to keep you safe from the darkness. But I was selfish. I needed you too much." Emma covered his hand with her own. "I'm not some delicate flower that needs protecting. I chose this, chose you, knowing what it meant." The tension in his shoulders eased slightly. He pulled her closer, until she could feel the steady beat of his heart against her palm. "You'll never have to face any of it alone," he promised. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." She believed him. How could she not? This man had fought his way back from death itself, had reshaped an empire, all while holding on to the tenderness she'd first glimpsed in that quiet hospital room. There, the world would never be simple or safe, but in that moment, it was enough. The leather chairs in Matteo's office still held the lingering scent of his mother's perfume, a ghost of the past that would take time to fade. Emma sat across from his massive mahogany desk, watching as he signed document after document, each stroke of his pen cementing his control over the Castellano Empire. The sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the room. 2 guards stood outside the door, a constant reminder of their new reality. Emma touched her father's medallion, drawing comfort from its familiar weight against her chest. "You're quiet," Matteo observed, looking up from his paperwork. His eyes, once clouded by weakness, now held a sharp intensity that still took her breath away. "Just thinking," she replied, offering him a small smile, "about how different everything is now." Matteo set down his pen and stood, moving around the desk with the fluid grace of a predator. No trace remained of the paralyzed man she'd nursed back to health. He extended his hand to her, and she took it without hesitation, letting him pull her to her feet. "Some things haven't changed," he said softly, drawing her close. His thumb traced circles on her palm, a gentle contrast to the power he now wielded. "My feelings for you, if anything, they've grown stronger." Emma leaned into him, breathing in his familiar scent. "I know. It's just overwhelming sometimes. The guards, the whispers, the way people look at me now, like I'm something dangerous." "You are dangerous," he murmured against her hair. "You brought down an empire with nothing but your compassion and courage. My mother never saw you coming." A shiver ran through her at the mention of Vittoria. The woman was gone now, fled to parts unknown with what remained of her loyal followers. But her shadow still lingered, a reminder that danger could come from the most unexpected places. "I didn't do it alone," Emma reminded him. "You fought your way back. I just helped keep you alive long enough to do it." Matteo's arms tightened around her. "You did more than that. You gave me something to fight for beyond revenge, something worth living for." The setting sun painted the room in shades of gold and crimson, a fitting backdrop to their conversation. Outside, the sounds of the city carried on, cars honking, people living their normal lives, unaware of the power shifts and blood feuds that had reshaped the underworld in the past weeks. "What happens now?" Emma asked, voicing the question that had been weighing on her mind. Matteo guided her to the window, keeping her hand firmly in his. Below them, the family compound sprawled out like a small fortress. Guards patrolled the perimeter, their dark suits blending with the lengthening shadows. "Now we build something new," he said, "something better than what came before. The violence. It's part of our world, but it doesn't have to define us." Emma studied his profile, seeing both the ruthless Don and the vulnerable man she'd fallen in love with. "Together?" she asked softly. He turned to face her fully, his eyes intense. "Always together. You've seen the worst of me, my weakness, my rage, my violence, and still you're here." "I'm here because I love all of you," she said simply. "The strength and the vulnerability, the tenderness and the fury. I chose this life, chose you, with my eyes wide open." Matteo's hand came up to cup her face, his touch reverent. "You are the strongest person I know, Emma Rossi. Stronger than any of the men who think power comes from violence alone." The last rays of sunlight caught her father's medallion, making it gleam, a reminder of where she came from, and the path that had led her here. To this moment, to this man, to this life she'd never imagined but now couldn't picture living without. Their eyes met, holding all the promises they'd made in those dark hospital nights. They'd survived betrayal, violence, and near death. Whatever came next, they would face it side by side. Matteo leaned down, his lips finding hers in a kiss that spoke of possession and protection, of passion and promise. When they finally broke apart, the sun had set completely, leaving them in the gathering darkness. But Emma wasn't afraid. Not anymore. The golden light of dawn filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Matteo's office, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floors. Emma stood at the window, her fingers absently tracing the Street Christopher medallion that hung around her neck. 3 months had passed since Matteo's dramatic recovery, but the memories of those dark hospital nights still lingered. "You're up early." Matteo's voice came from behind her, deep and warm. His footsteps were silent as he crossed the room, but Emma felt his presence like a physical force. She turned to face him, drinking in the sight of him in his perfectly tailored suit. Gone was the helpless man in the hospital bed. This was Matteo Castellano in his full power, the Don who had reclaimed his empire. Yet when he looked at her, his eyes held the same tenderness they'd shown in those midnight conversations. "Couldn't sleep," she admitted, letting him pull her into his arms. "Antonio called last night about some movement on the west side, new players trying to test the borders." Matteo's jaw tightened, but his touch remained gentle as he stroked her back. "Let them try. They'll learn quickly enough that the Castellano family is stronger than ever." Emma pressed her face against his chest, breathing in his familiar scent. "I know. It's just different now. Before, I was just a nurse. Now you're mine," Matteo finished, his voice dropping to a possessive growl. "And everyone knows it." The words sent a shiver down her spine. She was no longer the lonely nurse working night shifts, sharing her secrets with an unconscious patient. She was the woman who had helped bring down Vittoria Castellano, who had earned the respect and fear of the most powerful criminal organization in the city. "The hospital called again," she said softly. "They want to know if I'm coming back." Matteo's arms tightened around her. "Do you want to?" Emma thought about it, about the simple life she'd led before. "No," she admitted. "That life. It feels like it belonged to someone else. Someone who didn't know who she really was, or what she was capable of." "You were always capable," Matteo said, pulling back to look into her eyes. "You saved my life when you had every reason to walk away. You faced down my mother's empire with nothing but courage and conviction." His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone. The morning light caught the ruby ring on his finger, the symbol of his power, restored to its rightful place. "The world is different now," he continued, "but some things haven't changed. My need for you, my love for you, those are constants, Emma." She leaned into his touch, remembering how it felt in those first days when his hands were too weak to hold hers properly. Now they were strong again, capable of both violence and incredible tenderness. "We're building something new," she said, echoing his words from weeks ago. "Something better." "Yes," he agreed, dropping a kiss to her forehead. "The old ways are changing. The violence will always be there. It's part of our world. But there's room for more. For mercy. For love." Emma looked up at him, seeing both sides of the man she'd fallen in love with. The ruthless Don and the vulnerable soul who had trusted her with his life. Together? Always together, he promised, his voice rough with emotion. "You're my strength, Emma, my conscience, my heart." The sun climbed higher in the sky, painting the city in shades of gold and promise. Below them, the compound was coming to life. Guards changing shifts, cars arriving with reports from the nights, activities. Their world was still dangerous, still filled with shadows and threats, but they faced it as one. Matteo's lips found hers in a kiss that spoke of possession and protection, of passion and promise. When they broke apart, his dark eyes held hers with fierce intensity. "Whatever comes next," he vowed, "we face it together." The morning sun cast long shadows across Matteo's office as Emma reviewed the latest intelligence reports. The mahogany desk, once his father's, now bore the weight of both their responsibilities. She'd gotten used to this new routine, analyzing threats, identifying potential allies, working alongside Matteo to reshape his empire into something stronger. "The Russo family is making moves in the south," she said, looking up to find Matteo watching her with that intensity that still made her breath catch. "They think we're vulnerable after everything that happened with your mother." Matteo's lips curved into a dangerous smile as he moved behind her. Chair, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders. "Let them think what they want. They don't understand what we've built." Emma leaned back into his touch, remembering how far they'd come from those nights in the hospital. Antonio says they're trying to turn some of our smaller operations, offering protection, better cuts of the profit. And what do you think we should do about it? His fingers kneaded the tension from her muscles, but his voice was all business. This was how they worked now, partners in every sense of the word. We need to show strength, she said, her mind racing through scenarios. But not just violence. That's what they're expecting. We need to be smarter. Mateo hummed in agreement, moving to perch on the edge of the desk beside her. Go on. The hospital network, Emma said, the plan forming as she spoke. We control most of the private facilities now, but the Russos still have influence in the public sector. If we expand our medical support programs, provide better care for their workers, we undermine their authority while building goodwill, Mateo finished, his dark eyes gleaming with approval. This is why I need you, Tesoro. You see solutions I would miss. Emma stood, pressing a kiss to his jaw. You would have seen it eventually. I just bring a different perspective. You bring everything, he corrected, pulling her closer. Strength, wisdom, compassion. You make me better. Their moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. Antonio entered, his face grim. Boss, we've got movement. The Russos are making their play earlier than expected. Mateo straightened, his posture shifting from lover to leader in an instant. Where? The docks. They're trying to block our shipments, and… Antonio hesitated, glancing at Emma. Speak freely, Mateo commanded. Emma is my equal in all things. They're spreading rumors about her, saying she's your weakness, that you've gone soft since taking her in. Emma felt Mateo tense, beside her, but she laid a calming hand on his arm. Good, she said, surprising both men. Let them underestimate me. It's worked in our favor before. Mateo's laugh was dark and proud. They never learn, do they? Antonio, gather the captains. We'll meet in an hour. As Antonio left, Mateo turned to Emma, his expression serious. Are you ready for this? It won't be like before. This is open warfare. Emma thought of those terrifying nights in the hospital, of watching Mateo struggle against his mother's poison, of making the choice to stand beside him despite the danger. She touched the medallion at her neck, her father's legacy of protection and sacrifice. I was ready the moment I chose to help you, she said firmly. We've faced worse than the Russos. We'll face this together. Mateo pulled her close, his kiss fierce and possessive. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Together, then. Let them come. Let them see what happens when they threaten what's mine. Emma smiled against his lips. What's ours? She corrected. We built this together, remember? What's ours? He agreed, and there was pride in his voice. Come. We have a war to win. They moved toward the door, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them. Emma felt the familiar mix of fear and excitement coursing through her veins. This was their life now. Danger and power, love and strategy, all wrapped up in the complex web they'd woven together. The silence in Mateo's office was deafening. Emma stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the sun set over the city they'd fought so hard to protect. Her reflection showed the toll of recent events. Dark circles under her eyes, a small cut healing on her cheek. But there was strength in her posture that hadn't been there before. Mateo's presence filled the room as he approached, his steps measured and careful. The limp from his old injuries was barely noticeable now, but Emma's trained eye caught the slight hesitation in his stride. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and she leaned into his warmth. The Russo family has officially surrendered, he murmured against her hair. Their territory is ours now. The docks, the medical facilities, everything. Emma closed her eyes, remembering the chaos of the past weeks. The gunfire, the screams, the desperate race to save lives while simultaneously taking them. Her medical training had never prepared her for this, being both healer and harbinger of death. How many did we lose? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. 12 of our men. Mateo's grip tightened, but it could have been worse. Your strategy with the hospital network saved countless lives. You gave our wounded somewhere safe to go, somewhere the Russos couldn't touch them. Emma turned in his arms, studying his face. The hardness was still there, the ruthlessness that made him such a feared leader, but she could see the exhaustion too, the weight of command, of knowing each. Death was ultimately his responsibility. "I keep thinking about that night in the hospital," she said, reaching up to trace the scar on his jaw, a reminder of his mother's betrayal. "When you first opened your eyes, when you kissed me, I was so scared then, but I had no idea what was coming." Matteo caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Do you regret it? Choosing this life?" "No." The answer came without hesitation. "It's not the life I imagined, but it's ours. Every choice, every battle, every moment led us here." She thought of her father's medallion, now locked safely in their private vault. Marco Rossi had died protecting the Castellano family, and now his daughter stood as its equal leader. There was poetry in that, she thought, a kind of cosmic balance. "The men respect you," Matteo said, pride evident in his voice. "Not just as my woman, but as a leader in your own right. They've seen how you fight, how you strategize, how you care for them and their families." Emma moved to his desk, running her fingers over the papers scattered there. Hospital reports mixed with territory maps, medical supplies, inventories alongside weapons manifests. This was their world now, this strange blend of healing and hurting, of protection and destruction. "I understand now," she said slowly, "why my father chose this life. It's not just about power or money. It's about family, about protecting what's yours, about building something that lasts." Matteo came to stand beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "Your father would be proud of you, Tesoro. You've honored his sacrifice in ways he couldn't have imagined." Tears pricked at Emma's eyes as she remembered the lonely little girl she'd been, clutching her father's medallion and wondering why he'd left her. Now she knew. He'd died protecting this family, protecting Matteo, and in doing so, he'd set in motion events that would lead his daughter to find her own place in this dangerous world. "We've lost so much," she whispered, thinking of the bodies they'd buried, the trust that had been shattered, the innocence that could never be reclaimed. "But we've gained something too, haven't we?" Matteo turned her to face him, his dark eyes intense with emotion. His hands framed her face with a gentleness that belied his deadly reputation. "We've gained everything," he said softly. "Power, respect, loyalty. But most importantly, we found each other. Everything else, the territory, the money, the influence, it means nothing without you beside me." Emma stood at the window of Matteo's office, their office now, watching the sun set over the city skyline. The golden light painted everything in warm hues, masking the scars of recent battles. Below, men patrolled the grounds with measured steps, their weapons visible reminders of the power they protected. Matteo's reflection appeared beside hers in the glass. He moved differently now, with the fluid grace of a predator fully healed, and ready to strike. The weakness from his months of captivity had been replaced by carefully honed strength. His shoulders were straight, his chin lifted, every inch the Dawn he was born to be. "The last of the paperwork is done," he said, his voice low and certain. "The territory transitions are complete. Even the old families have accepted our authority." Emma turned to face him, taking in the sight of him in his perfectly tailored suit. The golden light caught the ring on his finger, matching the one she wore, symbols of their unbreakable bond. "And the hospital network? Secure. Your reforms are being implemented across all facilities. No one will ever again use our medical centers for the kind of betrayal my mother attempted." His jaw tightened at the mention of Vittoria, but the pain in his eyes had lessened. Time was healing those wounds, slowly but surely. Emma stepped closer, straightening his tie in a gesture that had become habit. "I received word from Antonio. The last of the resistance cells have been neutralized. No one questions your right to rule anymore." "Our right," Matteo corrected, catching her hands in his. "Everything I am, everything I've built, it's ours. You saved my life, Emma. Not just in that hospital room, but every day since. You gave me something to fight for beyond revenge." She smiled, remembering those dark nights when she'd thought her heart would break from the weight of their secrets. "We saved each other. Your strength gave me purpose. Your love gave me a home." Looking around the office, Emma saw their shared life reflected in every detail. Medical texts shared shelf space with strategy books. Her laptop sat beside his, her files mixed with his reports. They had built something unique, a partnership that balanced healing with protection, mercy with justice. "Do you ever wonder," she asked softly, "what would have happened if I hadn't been assigned to your room that night?" Mateo's arms encircled her waist, pulling her close. No. Some things are meant to be, Tesoro. Your father saved my life when I was a boy. You saved it again when I was a man. The Rossi and Castellano families were always meant to be united. She leaned into him, drawing strength from his solid presence. The fear that had once consumed her, of the violence, of the responsibility, of losing herself in this dangerous world, had transformed into something else. Understanding, acceptance, power. We've changed this family, she said, thinking of the reforms they'd implemented together. The legitimate businesses they'd built, the communities they protected, the balance they maintained between necessary violence and measured peace. We've made it stronger, Mateo agreed. Your compassion tempers my ruthlessness. My strength protects your kindness. Together, we're unstoppable. Emma turned in his arms, reaching up to trace the scar on his jaw. Her first patient, her last weakness, her eternal love. No more secrets between us. No more battles fought alone. Never again, he promised, his dark eyes intense with emotion. Every victory, every challenge, every moment, we face it together. The setting sun cast long shadows across the floor, but Emma wasn't afraid of the darkness anymore. She had learned to navigate it, to use it, to find beauty even in its depths. With Mateo beside her, she could face anything. Ready to go home? He asked, offering his hand. She took it without hesitation, their fingers interlacing naturally. With you? Always. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.